How are you?
Good.
Good. It's a little after 1, so we can get started if that's okay with you. What do you think? You ready? Okay, so this afternoon, we have a guest speaker. Jeff Strickler is here to talk with us. Jeff and I worked together years and years ago.
Way too many. The early 90s, just.
Well, they don't know I'm that old.
Yeah, exactly, I understand.
And so Jeff's had Jeff actually started out here in LeGrand, Oregon. He grew up in LeGrand. He actually went to school in Ackerman. This used to be a grade school over here. Some of you may not know that. So Jeff actually...
It was a lab school, so it was, because this was a teacher college, formed as a teacher college way back when. And so even when I was a kid in the 60s, it was a lab school. And so what it was my teachers were professors, largely, some of them. But all the student teachers, the kids that were going through the education program, were the ones that I had the most interaction with. So it was a really interesting, and they were doing all sorts of modern teaching methods, which the fact that I'm still here.
Electrodes.
Yeah, a little bit of that, yeah. But things like self-study and stuff like that, the stuff that you guys just literally are natives with, was a lot of it, and so much more with the iPhone and everything else. But there was, we had cards and things like that we all accessed on our own, and I was. Understand they took the big auditorium up there and turned it into a data center. In my years, that was actually a team teaching thing. They had the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classes all in that big, huge auditorium, all together, all learning individually at times. So it was just a mess, but it was fun.
Yeah, exactly. So Jeff started out his career here, went into technology. He's done a lot of really cool and interesting things. So I thought it'd be interesting just to get together, let him share with you guys, talk about, especially the entrepreneurial stuff he worked on, how he started here, what his path looked like, what the challenges were.
Okay. And so
so it's pretty free form, you guys.
It's going to be very free form. Because I don't have a formal presentation. I thought, I was driving over here today, so was in Charlotte, North Carolina yesterday and flew home, and I got in the car early this morning from Portland. I live in Portland these days, and love the drive over here. Love coming here. So that's been, Wilson's been calling me since the day he became a professor here at Eastern Oregon. Jeff, you need to come over and talk to one of my class. I'm like, and we've just been trying to figure it out. I mostly get over here in the summertime because what really still calls me are the Wallowa Mountains. Get over there every year. Which are east. I taught that to Wilson just a second ago. Anyway, but I thought what I would do is share and try to do it really quickly. I'm going to ask you guys to hold me to it. Share my journey a little bit, just so you guys have a little bit more of an understanding. I don't have. Sorry, I've been taught how to do this, so I'll do better. I don't really have any idea what your curriculum is, where you are, and Wilson's journey as far as where you guys are in your classwork or anything like that. So I thought best, just kind of share my story and then try to get that done in about 15, 20 minutes. You guys get an idea of what I've done, and then pepper me with questions, because that's where I think it'll be the most fun. And we'll just kind of share, sort of where, as you guys are, at your stage, in this business course, and maybe where you go in life. Maybe I can offer some insights. I can certainly tell you some stories, and we'll just go from there, and just open up for questions. So I am going to try to do this quick, because God, can I go on and on about this? But yeah, I grew up here, and then went to grade school. Got back on campus because I got into theater, and they had a really good theater program here in high school. I got pulled onto the campus and then got to know some of the professors that way. My dad actually worked at the Forest Service lab that's just south of here, which was considered part of the campus. When they built that building, it was sort of grandfathered into sort of campus kind of stuff. So I always had access to Quinn Coliseum and all the athletic facilities, the swimming pool, and so I kind of lived on this campus for all 18 years I was in LeGrand. And then I ended up going here for personal, family, financial reasons. I ended up going here for my first year of college. So actually was a student at Eastern Oregon for a year. And then I went off to Oregon State. And then I went off, at that point, my dad was a scientist, as I mentioned, and that's the direction I thought I would go. I ran into a guy who still remains my best friend, who was in the business program, thought it was really fascinating. It was something I had never experienced before. We talked science around my dinner table, not business. And it was just really foreign concepts, but I found it really fascinating, and I switched over to business while at Oregon State. Graduated with a finance degree. But I had also been introduced to, knew I wanted to go to a graduate program, and I'd been introduced to a guy that was a lawyer. And I ended up with a business degree. I figured I didn't really want to continue in a professional graduate program in business. I wanted to try something new. I've always been a big learner, love challenging new things. And so I trotted off to law school. And that's my one, people ask me, have you lived your whole life in Oregon? No, I got this 3-year thing down in California, Berkeley, so to go to law school. And I thought I'd stay down there because what really interested me was, as Wilson indicated, entrepreneurism, emerging companies, building things from the ground up, and that has always been kind of a passion, always, kind of leadership kind of stuff. And Silicon Valley was in its heyday. There really had not been a lot of technology in Oregon, and technology, this will be a bit foreign to you guys, was nowhere near as pervasive as it is today. It was very localized. I mean, it was the early days of Apple. It was the early days of a lot of the tech companies. Even Microsoft was some future dream, kind of thing. Because it was really all about hardware, which is an interesting aspect of Wilson and my shared story, I think. When I got out of law school, and I had lots of opportunities to continue to work in the Bay Area, Portland, the area around Portland was really beginning to burgeon with new companies in the tech field, and it just felt like a more sane place to live than the Bay Area.
Berkeley's kind of an environment of its own.
Oh, indeed. Coming from Oregon State, which was an extremely conservative school back in the 80s, early 80s, and then into Berkeley, that was a bit of an eye opener. So, but it was more in the financial area. I mean, it's just what sort of housing prices and all the stuff you guys face as well. More zeros these days behind those prices than it was in my day, but. Good luck with that, by the way. But anyway, so I came back up to Portland and practiced law at a very large Northwest law firm, a branch office in Portland, and I was doing emerging company work, mostly capital formation, working with venture capitalists, working with the companies that were seeking venture capital money. I occasionally ventured into public offerings and doing public finance, and then because any kind of growth company is in a very flexible stage, and you're always looking, investors are looking for liquidity events. There's a lot of acquisitions and merger work that I was involved in as well. And that was my area of expertise, along with employee compensation, because at that point it was a lot of, not cash compensation, equity compensation, because again, that's a securities issue, and I had that at that level of expertise. So I was really developing quite a bit of expertise in that legal/business world. But I'd gone to law school, not really to be a lawyer. I really liked the business side of it. Law was just something that felt like it would be a big challenge, and it was. And when I got out, it was kind of like that's where my value was. I'd go take a bar exam, and I'd get a job at a really good law firm, and I could, feed my family. And so it was an easy bit, but I knew that I wanted out of it because it's essentially a consulting job, and I wanted to be more into it. And so my quip over the years is that I got really tired of selling my life off in 6-minute increments, billing by the hour, and so I exited to one of my clients that I just recently helped merge with another company on the East Coast, and that's the company where I met Wilson, and it was a company that was doing computer-aided software engineering tools. This is back in the day when hardware was king. And software was this art, and this weird little art, and it was often done on the chip. There was no, separate application. I look at iPhone apps. I mean, just totally different world these days than it was back then. You embedded the software on the chips. It was very much and so building those systems was very much like Detroit. It was very fixed and hard. And what this company did was a lot of testing of those, the design, and making it more of an engineering process, where you took it out of the art area and made it more of an engineering piece. The company that Wilson and I worked, the office that we worked at, the pre-merger company, was really focused on helping hardware companies. In this case, Intel was the big client. They just moved up to Portland, and they were making chips, and they needed help, and so we were helping them bring good, solid operational and discipline to the development of the software and then testing that software. And every time, all of our test equipment, because again, software, to find software, you weren't just going to basically build a new software program. You had to basically embed it. The merger that we'd gone through was a company that used actual software to do front-end design and an analysis of software that was going to be built. And as you can imagine, it was a lot more flexible, and when things changed, they could move really rapidly. And that company grew, and that side of the company grew pretty quickly. And the company in Oregon really struggled, because it was kind of a dying bit, because it was this weird, back in the very early 90s, it was this weird shift where hardware was really becoming less, it was becoming a commodity, and software was becoming where the real value is. So
the largest company in Oregon, an employer back in those days, was Tektronix.
Yes.
And Tektronix did a lot of in-circuit emulators and other kinds of
Right.
core hardware.
And they built out. In fact, there was a lot of people that would come out of Tektronix at our company. A few had come out.
Larry Sutter.
Yep. So, and what was interesting for me in that, I had been brought in because this company had decided that it was a privately held company. The investors had been in for quite a while, and they really felt like they needed to have a liquidity event. They wanted to go public. And I had done a lot of that work, and they thought, and I wanted to get out of the law firm. I was ready to move, and I was having some conversations with the CEO and CFO, and they decided it would be great to have an in-house lawyer. So, Jeff, come in as our general counsel, and you can help us go public. And I got there, and I learned a lot more about the company and sort of its revenue streams. This was a company that basically made, Wilson can probably contradict this, I think you were a little closer to it, but we would make 60% of our revenues in the last 48 hours of a quarter. Just all get dumped. It was the way the sales cycle worked, and the way the sales, the way they would offer discounts and stuff, in order to make those sales. But it was just this absolutely volatile space that the idea of going public was just nutty. And we never did. But because the East Coast company grew, it was an East Coast, West Coast thing, we moved that whole company back to the West Coast. I don't remember exactly what Wilson did. I think you went out on your entrepreneurial ventures at that point, because you didn't go to the East Coast.
I don't know, they originally transferred me to Rhode Island. I managed a group in Rhode Island. I was already there 2
I didn't
weeks
realize
ago.
you went.
For a little bit. I have to, there's a funny story, right? Rhode Island's an interesting place. It's we don't talk about it much here, but there they talk about it. It's kind of like the summer home for the East Coast mob or something.
Yep.
And so you go to Federal Hill where they have all the Italian restaurants, a different environment. And I took my wife out when I was looking at jobs, and she looked at the housing, she talked to people, and I don't know how much of a story you want to tell, but anyway, she just couldn't get comfortable.
Back in those days, I don't know, they revitalized the city. It was a scary, kind of dumpy East Coast city back then, dirty, and it was scary.
Yeah, I think the primary business was costume jewelry.
Yeah.
Or something, and so they had all this old plating, factories that did gold plating and made chains and stuff like that. And there was a lot of byproduct from that. So it's an old decaying industrial city.
Yep. And these days I hear, I've never been back, but anyway, sorry. I'm going back and forth. So they moved back to the East Coast. I stay in Oregon. I never did move to Rhode Island, but I was living, I was basically going back and forth for quite a while. And ultimately decided I could not continue to do that. And so I ended up taking a job again, as general counsel with a financial services organization that was, or I'm sorry, software that was, it was a company that was providing software as a service, early model. That was a really unique model back in those days to the financial services industry, basically automating where banks touch their customers. And the flagship product was a loan automation tool. And when I mean software as a service, this was all very much client-server architecture. There was no web. Well, actually, there really wasn't much of a web back then. But it was. But what we would do is every time banks would, the software would be loaded on their systems, as they would go in and use our software to help originate loans, we would charge them for every loan that they made. So it was this very beautiful recurring revenue business model that allowed this company to do very well. And when it went public, it was a nice, healthy company. I was their general counsel and the CEO.
Can I add something really quick? Just for those who don't know, I mean, this idea of going public or liquidity event, when you're starting a new company, investors put money into the company. As a company founder, you may put your own money, but you may put your time and energy into it too.
And your idea, your intellectual property.
Exactly. But that's all stuck in the business. You can't get any return on that until you reach some kind of liquidity event. So when you go public, the public buys ownership interest and you can get cash. If you sell the company to somebody else, you can also get cash. So investors are very interested in getting into a liquidity event.
And we can talk a lot about that to the extent you're interested as we get into that. But thank you. I may and at any
talk about this stuff every day.
At any point, if I'm asked, please interrupt me with a question if I'm talking about something you don't understand at all. I mean, if I'm just using terms and stuff. What's interesting, and give you a little more information about me to ask these questions, is the CEO, and this is a guy that I ended up working with for 25 years. I'll catch you up on that in a second. But the CEO had been a banking lawyer, so he was very familiar with UCC 3 and UCC 4, the federal statutes on the Uniform Commercial Code, on the regulations and bank regulations, stuff like that. He did not know much about M&A work. But he knew what he wanted to do by way of a strategy. Is he did not want to grow this company. It was when he got there, it was a single product company, and he felt that was a slow way to die. It's because you get other companies would compete with you, and they'd find ways to get around that and yet offer a suite of products. And he always liked, just to give you the example, he always liked to use the example, and this is so dated for you guys, but you may have heard of these archaic products called Lotus 123, which was a spreadsheet program, WordPerfect, which was a word processing program, and there was some PowerPoint-ish program that I imagine none of you have ever heard of because they were single product companies, and they were great. They were phenomenal products for what they did. But Microsoft figured out, no, let's put them all together, let's have an Office suite, and let them look and feel a lot like each other. And Wilson and I can attest, for so many years, they only barely looked and felt like each other, and they did not work together. But the story was out there, and that is such a powerful. So I want you guys, as entrepreneurs here, building a company, I really want you to take that, that concept of a diversified product offering that provides a level of value beyond the individual components of what you're offering. And that can be looked at in many, many ways. But Matt, my partner, the CEO at this time, had come up with this idea. He wanted to go out and buy everywhere banks touch their customers. He wanted products that basically covered that so that he would have this suite of products. And he didn't have a clue as to how to do the legal work behind that, or really even a lot of the negotiation stuff like that when he and I crossed paths. So I came on board, and it was a wonderful experience. And again, you need to remember in all of this, I am great at I'm okay with being a lawyer. I'm having fun. I enjoy the work. It's challenging, but that really wasn't what was driving me. I really wanted to get much more on the business side of it. And at the company that Wilson and I were at, I was only the lawyer. That really was my role. And I got to be a little closer to the business and be a bit more impactful on business strategy, but I was still a lawyer. And when I came to, this company was called CFI Pro Services, stupid name, but nonetheless. And when I came there, I was a general counsel and doing mostly legal work, but it was what my area of expertise was. So I had a lot of mastery in that, and so I added a lot of value in that process. Over the course of the 6+ years I was there, we did 16 acquisitions and grew the company from, I think I was about the 250th employee, and by the time we sold it, there were 1,100 employees, and so we grew it quite large. And I had a great experience, and over the course of that, I became my responsibilities expanded to where I was no longer just the lawyer. I always kept the general counsel title, but unless it had to do with acquisitions, all the rest of the work, there's a lot of legal work involved. When you go public and you sell your securities to the public, that is a huge regulatory burden on those companies to maintain, disclosure out to the public so that everybody has the information they need to make good decisions in the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. And so I hired 2 or 3 lawyers to do that work, and I hired, the products were largely legal products. I had 7 or 8 lawyers doing just the product work, and I also had all of the other corporate sort of stuff, HR and all the other kind of stuff where you need good legal counsel, and I had 2 other lawyers that were doing that work. So I ran this huge law firm inside this public company. And then I also was, the first place that I moved completely outside of law is I started running HR. And the reason I started moving into much more of an administrative operations role, going back a bit, is while I was a lawyer, one of my biggest frustrations, I'd help these companies do an acquisition, and they would do what is called due diligence. They would look in to see, they basically do the pre-work before they sign the contract to see, the finances, sort of all the costs, the product strategy, where the products were going to fit together, and one of the things that almost universally I felt they failed to look at was the corporate culture, the people that were working in this company that was buying this company, and whether those people were going to be able to work together well, and whether, and it's not that they wouldn't try to work together well, but sort of how the cultures meshed. And then they'd basically make the merger, the powers that be, the CEOs, would say, okay, we're gonna buy this company, we're gonna merge these 2 companies together, and they would because it's competition and all the other stuff going on, they would lose focus on what they'd done, and everybody would sort of like, okay, what's the next bright shiny object we're going to go chase, and they would let the value of all the things they thought they were going to get out of this merger, all the synergies that they were hoping for, they would let dissipate. And as a lawyer, I could do absolutely nothing about that because they weren't paying me to manage the acquisition after the fact. And we only did 1 acquisition, that little California thing, the years I was at Cadre.
Right.
But at CFI, we were doing this a lot. And after the first couple, it went exactly that route. My CEO, he'd go off and chase the next acquisition. He wanted to go after the next product, the next, I'm going to get this next place where banks touch their customers. And I would just, shake my head, and I started raising my voice, and I started complaining. This is stupid. We're just wasting money and wasting opportunity. And it's one of those, be careful what you complain about, because he had the power to say, well, go fix it. You're in charge of that now. So I ended up doing more and more of that sort of corporate integration work, and so which meant that I was really having to deal with everything: finance, products, and most importantly, corporate strategy, which is ultimately where I really, sort of organizational design and corporate strategy is where I really ended up enjoying my career the most. I'm failing on this, so I'm gonna speed this up a bit. So because we sold that company, and without going, you can ask the question if you're curious. Again, you guys were born after this event, most of you I suspect, but Y2K was this big scary thing that the computer systems that have all been built throughout the countries, throughout the world, had failed because space was at such a premium that they basically dropped the 19. So the only thing in the computer, if you were talking about 1968, was 68. There was no 19 in the computers. And so when the clock switched over into 2000, it was going to be 1901 or 1900.
Have you guys ever watched that movie Office Space? That's kind of what it was about. That's what they were doing, was fixing the software.
So it was this major, in 19, from about 1996 to 1998, there was this massive panic in the business world about what are all of these systems going to do when this hits, and nobody knows, and particularly in the financial markets, because banks were really relying on all these big, kludgy back-end systems. They hadn't really gotten updated, and so anyway, nothing happened because there was a lot of prep work done. And one of the things that the federal regulators in the banking system did was they basically told all banks, get this fixed, test it, prove that it's going to work, load the new systems, and then stop buying software. And I was in a business that sold software to banks. And we had a very difficult time. So, again, it's not always rosy. It's always, sometimes can be really challenging. And our revenues dried up. Now, I've got 1,100 employees. Our revenues just dried up, almost overnight because of this regulatory event at the federal level. And so we eventually found a buyer because we really could not survive in the public markets anymore. We eventually found a buyer, and so I built this company along with a lot of other people. We grew it really big, and we sold it, and you might think I'm independently wealthy as a result of that, and I was not. Because, again, our stock price was really depressed, and I'd come in after the public offering, and so, I didn't make any money on my equity in that company.
I think it was the IPO.
It was 1993, and I joined in 94. So.
Okay. Do you remember how big it was?
Oh, it was small, 4 million. I mean, this is 1990.
Yeah.
Something in that neighborhood. Yeah, it was very small.
And nowadays people go out like 80 billion.
Oh yeah, no, you can't even compare. I mean, it wasn't even considered a really small offering at 4 million back in those days. It was an okay offering. It wasn't huge, but anyway, so we sell that, and I enter, and this may be of interest to some of you. I enter my entrepreneurial phase, and my partner's wife, who has just a really wry sense of humor. I was at a cocktail party with her and my partner, the CEO of this company, one night, and I just happened to be standing next to her, and somebody comes up, and Matt introduces himself, because we'd sold the company, he was also playing entrepreneur again, and somebody asked, well, what does entrepreneur mean? And Lillian's comment was, well, best I can understand, it's French for you can't hold a job. And I've always loved that definition. So Matt and I both, we separated ways. We stayed very close friends and stayed in close contact. We went separate ways, and I did all sorts of things. Did a lot of consulting work. I tried to get a little company off the ground that we all take for granted now. But at the time it was pretty cool technology. It was that ability to take the same assets that you're displaying on a 1280 by 1080 screen, and also be able to show it on a phone in a different way. So resize assets and kind of reposition them so they're optimized for different formats. And literally, I had an architect and why I got excited about it, because I could see the future, and an architect that was able to demonstrate how he could do that from, at the time, a PC screen down to a phone. Problem was, there were no phones with screens, back in those days. So we were, other than in Europe. So we were way ahead of the market. I had a couple of VCs who literally were like, oh my God, this is gigantic. And I am not going to invest in it because, we don't have the infrastructure. You don't really have the marketing. And we were a tiny little company. The big companies like NWEA and Adobe and all those came in and figured it all out too. So we're all good. I don't think the fact that we didn't get funded didn't slow, the progress down at all. But I did that, ultimately backed away from that, did some work in the stored value industry where you could, again, this is also old school stuff, but long distance phone charges were horrendous back then. Nobody even thinks about it anymore, but what people would do to solve that is they'd go out to Costco and they'd buy phone cards. And because you could get long distance minutes for a lot cheaper price, but those cards had to be recharged. And the fraud involved in that was immense. That people would, basically, use freight credit cards to buy phone time. and then sell that in third world countries, and it was just gold. And the fraud was just horrible. So we built this huge system that was a big fraud detection system in this company, and did that work.
Do you remember that's how Bill Gates and Paul Allen got started? You know, the guys who started Microsoft. They started out by building this little box with the tones that could cheat the phone system.
Yep.
You know, and you make a phone call and you play these tones, and they say, "Oh, yeah, these guys are cool. They've got a calling card or something. They'll let you place these calls all over the world."
Yep. Phone companies were I mean, they're big today, obviously, but you know, communication is huge. I mean, I always look at, you know, where the big drivers in business are. It's communication, it's transportation, and then these days healthcare and stuff like that. But anyway, I actually got back with my partner because he was struggling with the business, and to make it really quick, and he was struggling on the security side. He had a small company, and he had made a lot of money at CFI because he was there for the public offering, and so he was investing it in this new company that he was really trying to get off the ground, and so he was basically paying his own money for about 12, 14 employees, and he had a fairly large office with some room. He said, "Jeff, come on over. Oh, you know, because you know you're doing all this stuff, and you could use an office, and I'd love to have you nearby. And oh, by the way, could you help me out with all of the securities work?" Because he was basically going out and raising money from some of his friends in what is called private offerings. And again, it's kind of what Wilson was saying, is that this is pre-public offering. You're just going out and you're getting an angel or somebody to invest in you, and their money's going to get locked into your company until you have a liquidity event. But Matt had a good track record with the prior company, really smart business guy, and he knew lots of fairly wealthy friends, and so he was going out and raising money from them. And said, "Take a look at this." I looked at it and I go, "Jesus, Matt, you're about to go to jail because of because there's a lot of regulations around how you sell securities." And Matt had, was violating every one of them, I think, so we basically fixed that. It was easy to do, and all of his investors were totally cool, but we had to go out and do the right document, and right paperwork and filings with the federal government,
And
state
the
government.
entrepreneurs are known to bend the rules a little bit.
A little bit, and
From time to
again,
time.
and it is one of those things where, I do not want you to take this out of here, but there is an aspect of beg forgiveness, rather than ask permission at times, because you got to, you got to move. Everything's moving really fast. So, but anyway, so Matt and I we got into this business, and that ended, a longer story, but that one didn't end so well for either, mostly for him, because he'd been investing his money, and it didn't end all that well for me because, I refused to take money from him, so it was one of those things where I was doing it for free for a long time, and then I had to go find another job. And I'd gotten involved, I'd gotten involved with a guy, just to give the diversity of the stuff I work on, I'd gotten involved with a guy who was doing port security and identification theft. So literally I was helping him. He'd come up with a new design for shipping containers that would be much more secure and avoid, because at the time, this was post 9/11, about 3-4 years after that, and the real concern was the next time we had a terrorist event in the United States, it was almost certainly going to be in the ports. Something was going to come in a container. And so what we're trying to do is come up with a better design to avoid having things messed with, containers tampered with while in transit. And I was in the middle of that, and I was struggling with how to finance that, and it was an area that was not my area of expertise. I have really focused mostly on technology my entire career. And Matt got hired at this not-for-profit company that was involved in education, doing assessment for kids. And basically they had a really unique assessment that was measuring what the kids knew. Most of the tests you take are testing you whether you've learned what you're supposed to learn. Did you get that unit of study? Are you ready to graduate, et cetera, et cetera. That's how much, that's whether you know enough. This test actually ignored all of that and said, what do you actually know? And they did it through a computer adaptive assessment, which is, the question was answered. Actually, I should ask you guys, did any of you guys take the MAP assessment in high school or in grade school, junior high? None? Do you recall taking that? So that was NWEA's test. And it was, it's a growth assessment. It's measuring how you were growing through school and stuff like that.
About half if I've read the background right, about half of the school districts in America use
These days they do. And so, yeah, it's not small. There's 11 million kids, and there's about 50 million kids in the United States in grade school. And they tested over 11 million. So anyway, so Matt got hired there, and he gave me an opportunity to sort of get away from some kind of really challenging problems with these two small startups, including some challenges I was having with the people funding these companies, and actually my partner, loved him dearly, but he's a bit crazy. So, and I'd worked with Matt in two companies before, and he was a great partner. He said, Jeff, come on over. I need you to be, I'm CEO. I need you to be basically, I'm going to go out and figure out this education thing. I'm going to be external, and I need you to keep the train on the tracks and do the operations. So I was chief operating officer and eventually president of NWEA. And that company, and the uniqueness of that one, it's a not-for-profit. So there's some interesting aspects around that, but it is run. Wilson was saying you come in here and you can talk about the difference between not-for-profit accounting and for-profit accounting. And I'm like, yeah, I could, but I don't know that much about it, and it really wouldn't matter because NWEA really runs just like a regular technology organization. It's software as a service. The tests are delivered over the web. We charge on it's a recurring, again, one of these beautiful recurring revenue models where we charge on a per student basis. So if we have more students, we have a little bit more cost, not much more cost, but we charge, that you grow the number of students, the number of customers you have, your revenues grow to cover your costs, which is a very important aspect of all of this. Anyway, I'm going to bring this to a close, and then because I really want to open this up for questions.
What were you generating annually?
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. So it was a very fun ride. I was there for 11 years. We grew it from the measure that mattered to us was when I got there. We were testing about 1.5 million kids a year, and because this company had been around for quite a while. I actually should share that. So it's been around for 40 years. It really was a mom and pop, almost nothing organization until 2000. When they created the computer adaptive test. And when I say adaptive test, when you answered a question, if you answered it right, they'd make the next question harder. If you answered it wrong, they'd make the next question easier because they didn't want to know if you knew enough. They wanted to know what you knew. So they wanted to keep you inside the test, if you will. And so you were getting this information. And so, how did I go off on that one? Anyway, we're testing 1.3 million kids. And this last year, they will test over 11 million kids. On a revenue basis, we were doing about 20, I'm sorry, where I was going with that is in 2000, they developed the computer version of that, which obviously works a lot better than adaptive paper, because paper doesn't adapt all that well. And then this law, No Child Left Behind, it was a federal mandate for that same information we were delivering, so it took off like a rocket. And the reason Matt got brought in was the people running the organization, while they made some just brilliant business decisions, including that recurring revenue model and the way they designed all of that, they really did not understand organizational design and how to really generate, to grow an organization. And it just had outgrown them. And it was one of those things that, I think they were really good people. They had really good intentions, and it just got sideways on them. And they needed somebody or some bodies, because I was included, to come in and really that understood how to run a business of that size. So we grew it from, when I came on board, I was the 172nd employee, and they have about 750 these days. And then on the revenue side, we're doing about 23 million when I joined in 2007. So they'd grown from less than $1 million in revenue to about 23 million from 2000 to 2007. And then we took it to last year in June, they did 148. And so it's big growth. And what's interesting about that is so again, you might say, it's not just, and I'm no longer there. I am retired. I put quotes around it because I don't think I'm done, but I also don't, my wife keeps telling me, Jeff, stop working, let's go travel. So I'll see where I end up. But, and you almost, again, with that kind of growth, you might think that I am, again, independently wealthy. I'm wealthy enough to retire, but one of the things about a not-for-profit is there is no ownership in a not-for-profit. So there's no equity. And so there is nothing really to sell. And I'll stop with one last anecdote.
Pay yourself a lot.
Hmm?
You just need to pay yourself a lot.
Exactly, and again, I was well paid for those 11 years, which is why I can retire. There is kind of a fun little story in all of this. Is that I had in the CFI company, I had a young attorney when I left there. I was kind of his mentor, and we stayed in touch for all the years afterwards. We'd get together every once in a while. His career took off after I left, and that company got bought by. In the whole process, when we sold it, it got sold again, and then got sold again, and it was bought by one of the takeover artists, Ron Perlman, who you may not know, but he's you probably know the Revlon brand. He's owned that for years, and he's one of these guys who comes in and basically does these roll-ups and figures out how to just basically squeeze costs out of organizations, and it's pretty brutal. It's not something that I would. I'd want to work in anyone. I would not want to work in one of his organizations, but I can't argue with the capitalist aspect of that, and the discipline of just going in and saying, I'm going to squeeze for those public shareholders. In Ron's case, he's the majority public shareholder. And I'm going to squeeze this out so I maximize the value of this company for the shareholders. And again, I think that is a good thing. My argument is in the methodology. So this young attorney has risen up, and he's in a pretty cool role because he's in charge of strategic acquisition. And I didn't realize this at the time, but he calls me up and says, Jeff, we should go get coffee. I'm like, okay, we haven't talked in a couple of years, let's go do that. And in the course of this conversation, he does what is called a bear hug, says, we want to buy you. Because they had looked at us and they were in the ed tech space and they'd seen assessment and they really thought they wanted to buy us. And I go back, the lawyer in me just kicks in. I've got cold chills going up and down my back. I know I'm kind of going through my checklist of shit, I got to let the board of directors know. I'm going to need to, talk to my partner. We're going to have to get this all figured out. I'm going to start talking to the shareholders. We don't have it. And it was one of these I just started laughing out loud to this guy, and he knew what he had done. This was a bear hug. He was going to start chewing us up, and I'm laughing. First I thought I was going crazy, but it was. I just said, "Gee, that's just really cute that you want to buy us. There's nothing to buy." And so what I'm going to leave you with is, if you want to ask some questions about the not-for-profit world, because there's a lot of things we could talk about there, and it's my most recent experience. But there's pluses and negatives. The negatives are you don't have access to the capital markets. You can't go out and raise money. Matt and I did a number of acquisitions over the last 11 years. We had to self-fund all of those, and it was a lot of very creative seller finance. In other words, we bought a company from somebody who then we paid out over time because of our revenue stream. We didn't, we couldn't just go say, okay, here's a bunch of stock or here's a bunch of money because we've sold a bunch of stock. So you don't have access to the capital markets, which is really limiting and really challenging at one level. But on the other hand, if you ever go public, you absolutely lose control of your organization. And actually, even as entrepreneurs, when you sell to venture capitalists, I was just in North Carolina talking to a young guy who's getting a company started up. I think he's at a really cool place. I'm kind of excited to kind of help him out. But when it came down to it, he's gone through one financing acquisition. He raised I think it was $2.5 million, and he now only owns 46% of his company because the VCs own the other 54%. So he doesn't have control of his company anymore. And so, and that's...
You guys have all watched Shark Tank, right?
Yeah.
Everybody here?
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of idea on a bigger scale, right? So you have a company, investor wants to put money into it. In order to take their money, you need to give them a piece of equity, some ownership interest in your company. But if you give them too much and they own more than you do, then they're making the decisions. They're the drivers.
And one of the things they could do, now this is, in most cases it doesn't happen, although it absolutely happened when I was a lawyer with one of my clients. 3 guys who had come up with a better way to make paper diapers, of all things, young guys. And, it's like, why did you ever get into this business? But paper technology is actually pretty fascinating, as I learned. And it's one of the things that's really cool about being a lawyer. You get to work with lots of different companies and lots of different technologies. But they had done that. They'd gone out and they'd financed their company. And the VCs, through 2 acquisitions, or two investments, had obtained control, and the minute they obtained control, which was just not planned and not expected, they fired 2 of the guys. They just said,
Yeah, so
you know,
they can
we
actually-
control it, we have the right to hire and fire, and we're gonna bring in somebody else because we think they're better. So these 2 guys, one guy survived because he was absolutely necessary. But these other 2 guys, you know, and these 3 had been partners, which put this one guy who stayed in a horrible place. I mean, you know, and I don't think he stayed for very long because his 2 best friends had been exited. And, again, so those are just one of the challenges. It doesn't happen often, and because the VCs understand it's your idea, it's your passion, you're the one's going to basically make their money worthwhile. In this case, these VCs were just.
Well, that's why in the old days they called them vulture capitalists.
Oh, they still do. Most of them. Anyway, I'm sorry that took way long. Even I wasn't expecting to go that long, so I'm sorry to give you that long diatribe. But you get a bit of a feel for what I've done and what I'd love to do, and I'm willing to stay. I think Wilson, I don't know if we have the room, but I'm willing to stay as long as you guys want to stay. But I'm happy to answer any questions or tell you more stories if you'd like.
So what do you think, you guys?
And if you don't have any questions or stories, I'll bore you with something else. So.
What do you think, Sarah? You think I'm a...
Call me out.
Yeah. Sarah's actually the president of the Entrepreneurs Club, and I'm sure she came with at least 1 or 2 questions.
Tell me more about that HR experience you have and how you got to that.
Again, okay, so with regard to experience, there's a lot of legal aspects to hiring and firing employees. You've got all the benefits issues and all the rest of it. So as the company lawyer, I was brought in on a lot of questions. In particular, we're about to terminate an employee. Jeff, can you make sure that we're doing all this right and all the rest of it? And what I realized, so you find where things are not working really well, and you get in and you get a lot more experience there, and then you start realizing, and this is where my head always goes, is okay, how can we do this better, and what should we, what sort of systems should we set up? And as I mentioned before, when you're doing a bunch of acquisitions and you're bringing a new company in, the finance people pretty much do they pencil it all out and they figure out how they're going to make it work, and they make their assumptions and they understand how. Okay, so we get a here's our good, here's our sort of middle level sort of expectations, and if things start to fall apart, here's where we are and how are we going to respond to each of those scenarios. They get all that figured out. The technology people, they do their technology diligence, and so on and so forth through the organization. Things like marketing and how you're gonna basically blend these 2 different. And I should start with culture, because marketing even comes from the culture. I mean, the idea of blending Nike with even like a Columbia Sportswear, it would be really challenging because they come at it from a very different approach. There's the Nike sort of just do it aspect, and there's the Columbia, we're tougher than nails sort of thing. And how are you going to blend the just do it and tougher than nails? Maybe that wouldn't be so difficult as I think about it. But you are going to have much challenges. So there's things like that just don't mesh. But it really comes down to kind of people and attitudes, always, and how you're building your teams. So the opportunity for organizational development and organizational design in the HR department was where I got my first toehold, as I was told, Jeff, you're complaining about the fact that we're not getting full value out of these acquisitions. I felt like it was the people who were being ignored and not carefully, it wasn't being carefully thought through and maintained, basically. The follow-up was missing.
So, this doesn't have anything to do with what you said. The class that joined us here was an hour in length. So 50 minutes.
You should have seen most of my company meetings. They'd walk out at any given point too. I'm so used to this.
Yeah, so I don't want to make you
Yeah,
feel like
it's fine. You got other classes to go
feel
to.
like you're being held hostage either.
I got one. There was one company that did not separate and kept building that you worked for. Your job experience.
Did
You know how
not,
they had a corporation that merged? Is there any one that did not want to?
State independent, and actually grew.
Yeah.
well, of the companies that I worked for, NWEA, I didn't explain that. So what happened at the end, what happened last year was my partner decided to retire. And the obvious thing might have been for me to just say, okay, well, I'll become CEO and we'll just keep going.
You want to just introduce yourself?
For many different reasons, I did not want to be CEO. And part of it was, I'm 60, I think I'll work another 3 years. I've also been here 11 years, and it's time for, I had some really great VPs below me that I really thought should be CEO and should move up in the organization. I needed to get out of the way, kind of thing. That was my attitude. And this is just a great opportunity. We'll bring a new CEO in, and I'll help him or her get really good at what they're doing, and then I'll exit. So that's what we did. Brought the new person in. It was a he, and he he's a pretty confident guy. I think he's going to be really good. But he looked at my role, and my partner, smart guy, had gotten really. He'd worked himself into a really nice gig. He only had one direct report, and that was me, and I really wasn't a report, so he didn't have any management responsibilities. Everybody in the organization reported to me. The new CEO comes in. Jeff, everybody in the organization reports to you. What's my job? It was and so he made the decision. I was completely okay with it. Agreed that Jeff, why don't you go do something else if you want to, and he made it well worth my while. So it was awfully nice actually. So it was just a very pleasant sort of like, okay, Jeff is going to go figure out what he wants to do next. So. Who knows what that is? I guess coming and talking to EOU is one of the things that I did.
So, I mean, if I can add something to that.
So I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question. So that company is continuing to grow, and I think it will just continue to. I mean, it has got it's a fairly narrow market, but we said it in the strategic vision of that company is to expand. That I talked earlier about having multiple products. We achieved that. It has there's 4 different assessment types there now, and we really moved into, this gets much more particular to that business, but when you assess a child, it's like weighing the pig. Great, you need to weigh the pig, but the pig's not going to grow just because you weighed it. That was always my big issue about being in an assessment company. Great, we measured the child. What are you going to do about that in order to make sure that child really grows? So we added a big professional development arm, which for those of you that are entrepreneurs, they're still here, there is a real challenge with that. The software, the tests, are like software. It doesn't cost me one dime more to issue another test to a kid. I mean, it's all over the web. You add that kid, I get an extra $13.50 a year for that kid. Great, my revenues go up. But if I get into professional development, that's personal services, and that's dollars for hours, and that is a much more challenging piece to scale. And if you guys want to talk about, that would be a good topic to talk about, is because scaling a business, growing a business, getting into a place where you're actually earning your revenues and you break even and then you start to make some profit is one thing. But when you have really massive growth and you're really growing to scale, all of your systems that worked, and literally all of them that worked at this level don't work at that scale level. And so one of my biggest challenges was how to develop a professional development organization, so we can help teachers understand our data and understand how to bring in other data that they're getting from the kids to really optimize the child's learning experience. And part of the argument to that is wait a minute, NWEA, you're an assessment company. Why are you screwing around with teacher training? And by the way, when you talk about other data, what do you know about that other data that we should rely on you to deliver that information? So you really have to go out and reprove yourself all over again. Here we are, this giant organization that is super well respected in the assessment field for a very unique test. And we're suddenly trying to expand it to a different marketplace and basically burnish ourselves because of the reputation of assessment in a completely different field and with different financial model challenges and all the rest of it.
Let me throw in something in maybe a little different direction too. I mean, if you think about a business enterprise and you start and you grow, every business enterprise has a lifetime associated with it. Some of them are long, some of them are short. And so when you talk about remaining independent, I mean, when you think about Cadre Technologies. There was Northwest Instrument Systems and Cadre, put them together. Northwest Instrument Systems actually went away, it became Cadre. Cadre was eventually acquired by Computer Associates, I think.
Eventually. Yeah, it was Cayenne there for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so, especially in the technology space, you see a lot of mergers and acquisitions. Company, you see those pictures where the little fish gets eaten by the big fish, and the bigger fish, and the bigger fish. It's very common, especially if you create a company that has any value at all. And so, I mean, when Jeff's talking about mergers and acquisition, that's one of the things he's helping do is grow these companies, but then finding different ways of combining them and restructuring them and making them work together and become more efficient. So it's sometimes, even though it's cool to grow a business and say, oh yeah, I grew General Electric, which has been around 150 years or something.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's more than that. As an entrepreneur, you're growing. You just want to give your idea life. So you bring it to life and you grow it. And sometimes the way to take the next step is to be acquired by somebody or combined. with
Because they
somebody.
have those systems in place
Right.
to allow you to.
And so it's not always a bad thing. I mean, sometimes.
Oh, it's often a good thing. I mean, there's just challenges with it. And, and getting back to your question about HR, if I can riff on that a bit, because if there's one thing that I can leave, if we step back and kind of at the business level, where my passion ended up was really organizational development and organizational design. And on the development side, for me, what it was how do you get people to work really well together? Because technology is technology, and you need a good idea, and it always has to provide value, And as you guys get out in your career, I would take that at the personal level, your team level, your business level, and all the rest of it is constantly and diligently and aggressively look for that value, but with a lot of empathy. And what I mean by empathy is not that sort of sympathy mode, but it is putting yourself in the shoes of your customers. What are they looking for, and what are they trying to solve? What's the problem they're trying to solve? And so again, it is the more reading that I have been doing lately, and my own experiences running, managing 750 people, it really is how do you create an environment where the social interactions, humans are nothing if not social animals. I mean, they have to have, it's that interaction. That's what drives company success. I mean, you can have the greatest idea in the world. If you're not connecting with other people and you're not getting the power of a team involved in that, it's not going to, you're never going to reach that scale, those scale problems that I was talking about earlier, which, you may say, good, kind of thing, because they are challenging. But again, the idea is you want to grow these businesses. So, and the things that I guess I would leave you with, there's some things that I've learned in all this, and you guys can find this stuff on the web, and I'll even, if you want to write it down, there's three things that I have combined together. There's a book called Team of Teams, strongly recommended, and I'll explain why in a second. But more fundamentally, there's a guy named Simon Sinek who has a great YouTube. Strongly recommend you just go watch the YouTube because it's an easy one. And I just Simon Sinek, his last name is S-I-N-E-K, and just look up why. Because what he gets to is this concept of don't build your business around the what. So, look, I'm going to go build, and I'll use Nike because he uses Nike. So it's just easy for me not to try to come up with one of my.
Simon Sinek is a TED Talk, so you can go out
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the TED
exactly.
Talk site and put
Yep.
in S-I-N-E-K
Or YouTube. I mean, you don't have to go to TED. I mean, believe me, he's all over YouTube too. But I think this is really important to understand. And as I'm saying this though, and I don't think I think he has some other talks. If you get into it, you'll get to the personal level. But think about it for your own self and your own journey and what you want out of life. Because you can talk about the what. I'm going to be a lawyer, or I'm going to make athletic shoes. Nobody cares. That's not really why they're buying your athletic shoe. They want a shoe, but that's not why they're going to buy your shoe. And he takes it to the next layer, the next hierarchy of the how. Okay, if you talk about you make your shoes out of really great stuff, you got these really great cushion, we're going to do this, that, the other thing, or I'm going to be a really good, I'm going to be a good lawyer in this way. so I'm going to be a securities lawyer, and I'm going to practice in this way. I'm going to be really conscientious of my clients. So that's the how. And again, everybody can solve that problem, and there's no passion underneath that. It's figure out the why. That's the just do it. That's the we're tougher than nails, from Columbia or whatever their slogan is these days. That is the passion behind why you want to be a lawyer. Really, so again, you take it down to the personal level as well. So that concept is one that I would really, at least familiarize yourself with. The other one that I've had really interesting conversations with over the years, you guys may be aware that in many, many businesses, the sales model is you hire salespeople, and if they're successful selling, you pay them a commission. Car salesmen are that way, obviously, or many, fewer these days, I think. And that's a great way because, as a business, you're not paying them much as a base salary, and you're really incenting them to get on the phone and call or get out in their cars and drive and go to customers and succeed. Because as the business owner, you want those sales. And so I'm going to pay you more if you sell. And the more, interesting enough, in NWEA, we did not pay a sales commission. We paid our salespeople a really, really good salary, whether they sold or not. And it was my vice president of sales was always challenged by this because what it did is it put a lot of pressure on her. She had to manage her people and make sure they were selling. There could be no excuses. They absolutely had to sell. I didn't reduce my expectations about what the salespeople were going to do, but I didn't want them motivated by money, and I didn't really think it was going to motivate them. And so one other person that I would, I forgot his name, Daniel Pink. Has a really great, it's not a YouTube and it's not a TED, it's an RTE. It's the one where they draw the cartoons really fast and explain this. But look up Daniel Pink, Motivation. And he's got research that I find really fascinating, and I put it to work at NWEA, and it was fabulous. We had phenomenal sales growth, and I really had no unproductive salespeople at all without paying them a commission. And what his thesis is, if you're selling something really simple, like a widget, and you might even argue a car, even though cars aren't simple, but it's a simple concept of, or people have already decided what they want, kind of thing. Maybe commissions will work, but provided that you meet a baseline. In other words, people have to put food on the table, they have to be able to make their home mortgages, stuff like that. As long as you provide somebody, in other words, I could not have with my folks, I couldn't pay them a crappy salary, expect them to do really well, they wouldn't stay. But if I pay them a good salary, but not as much as they might make under a commission structure, what's really motivating them is purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And I personally cannot imagine, there are businesses where you wouldn't want to do that. But where you guys sit today for your own careers, and for the businesses that you might want to build this information age and all this social network age and everything else, I can't imagine you don't want to keep those three motivators as your primary goal for how you design your organization for each and every employee. And what I mean by that is that, your purpose, that you really have a reason. Every employee has a reason for why, and they understand it, and it's being fulfilled. They feel good about what they're doing. NWEA, we had that in space. We were helping kids learn. Everybody felt good about that. Every day, I had motivated employees because the purpose thing was being absolutely solidly met. Mastery, that everybody in your organization is a learner and has an opportunity to keep learning and get really good at what they do, and they know they're good and they're rewarded for being good. And not necessarily monetary rewards, but they're getting feedback that they know that they're good, and then the autonomy that you, and this is where I feel very strongly, is you don't want people who have everybody looking over their shoulders and don't get to make their own decisions about how they're advancing their own career and how they're doing their own work, and that they really understand how they're contributing to the benefit of the organization. So, and then the reason I mentioned the Team of Teams book is that he does touch on both of those. And what's really interesting is the guy who wrote this book and who came up with this concept was one of the military guys, leaders, generals in Iraq back in 2006. But what it was this concept of, and this is where I go with it, and kind of expanding on what he's saying is, businesses these days, more than ever, need to be nimble. Changes, and for I was actually mentioning this to my wife on the drive over this morning, and she was saying, I think you should really get that out there. And I said, well, at one level, Mary, this was a new concept for you and me, because she was talking about her dad was in his career his entire life. My dad was in his career his entire life. And I said, we're so far beyond that at this point. I don't think anybody in this room is going to be really thinking they're going to have one career their whole lives. I said, I think I know my audience, a little bit more at this point. But what I do think is important is that you have this sense of motivation and this sense of the why of what you're doing at the individual level, but also at the team level. And then as your organization grows and gets more complex, it is amazing how it breaks into silos. And you'll see all sorts of books about breaking down silos within organizations. And you do want to structure your organization for efficiency. You want a finance department, you want a marketing department, you want a sales department, you want an engineering department, because you have like people doing like tasks together, and there's a real efficiency there. But if they don't talk to each other, you will not have all of the synergies of the organization. And what Stanley McChrystal does in this book is have a really great concept about treat the entire organization like treat all of the different divisions of the organization like the individuals on a team. And the way teams work is you get together, you understand each other, you talk to each other, you see each other's face, you have friendly, you build social relations, connections within the members of your team. You need to do the same thing within the various teams of an organization. Not everybody's going to get to know everybody. You had a 750-person organization. I didn't know everybody, but there were friendly faces in every department that I knew that I could connect with, and I had a social relationship with, that basically greased the skids for any communications that needed to occur. I didn't have to be, and I sat in a really weird position, but what I was really insistent upon was each and every employee know at least one person in every other one of the departments. Go to lunch with them, have conversations with them, so that when you do need to interact with that other department, you know someone who you can go to at a personal, social level and have that conversation. Again, I think you guys may understand that. I mean, you live in that world a bit more flexibly than I certainly do. I can't get past the first page of Facebook.
Secret, we had to wear a name badge, and then the first name was really big and the last name was really small. So you can pretend like you know everybody.
Yeah.
Steve, Dave.
Yeah, it needs to be a bit more than that. You need, again, my argument was to the employees, and I had many conversations with, my argument to the employees was, have a relationship with that person so that you don't have to introduce yourself to even explain what your last name is or what you do for the organization. Have a prior established relationship so that you can make that just so much easier. So that, again, I realize this is done really fast and it's probably way, too general, but just some thoughts.
So I don't know that you get me completely out of trouble here. But I'll let Sarah pick the next person for the next question.
Oh, put her on the spot twice. Puts you on the spot, then he does it again.
You choose someone.
You want me to?
Yeah.
All right. Look, see, this is the teaching thing. See the aversion of eye contact?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, light him up.
Alright. Let's see. Sounds like you've done just about everything.
Be like cash cab, you could
Yeah.
need a lifeline.
I guess this is a little off topic, but
Good.
last year I just did a project on the rising cost of education because we're all going through it. You mentioned you went to law school, and those prices have gone up a lot recently.
Yeah, you want to get. I'm going to make you really sick. I went to a top 10 law school.
Yeah.
My total cost, tuition and fees, $3,000.
Like
Just
a
for
third
1
of
year,
what we
or-
paid
3
over
years.
here. So for a year.
Sorry, I'm going to explain that.
And Berkeley's a big deal too, right?
So it doesn't exist anymore. California's broke. I went to law school in 1982. I'm going to let you get to your question, but it's one of the I love telling that to you. I mean, I don't love telling that. It's because I realize just how you're all like, God damn it. But it's fun to tell for that very reason. So I paid less for law school my first year than I was paying at Oregon State as an in-state student. Here's how it happened. Berkeley, California, the University of California system, because California was making, as a state, was making so much money. I think it was tuition free. There were fees, but it was tuition free back in the 70s. I mean, literally, if you were a California resident, you could go to college for free. And Berkeley is one of the great institutions in this country. I mean, it's just, so is UCLA. But Berkeley is really one of these, just like, it's like an Ivy League school at the
It's like Stanford kind of.
yeah, well, Stanford's like an Ivy League school, but as a public school, it had just this phenomenal reputation. By the time of the 80s, they were charging tuition, but they hadn't quite figured out how much they could charge, and so I lucked out in that regard. And then because of what I had done at Oregon State, both grade-wise, and I was student body president there, and so there's just a lot of things that were on my resume that caused Berkeley to want to have me. They gave me a scholarship, which waived my out-of-state tuition. Okay. One other thing is that I mentioned, that I was here my first year was my dad was passing away, kind of thing. So there was just a lot of stuff, and I had emancipated myself from my parents because of the financial situation there. It was all, I had a great relationship with my parents. It just made sense that I was going to emancipate myself. So I put myself through Oregon State as well, and so I had enough bona fides that I could say, this is me, and my parents aren't paying. So there was never a connection back to my parents and their financial resources, which wouldn't have changed a whole lot, I might add. And then I did pretty well, and they gave me a full ride scholarship my second year that actually paid me for even some of my living expenses. And the generosity, the loan opportunity, all this kind of stuff, it was just nuts back in the early 80s. And so, but I had a friend, a contemporary that went to Stanford, just as a comparison, and it cost him to get to Stanford for 3 years, $38,000. So again, I got the bargain of the century, truly. It was just nuts. But
In California.
But you had a question, so what are we going to do about the rising cost of education?
Well, yeah, that and just like whether or not, it sounds like you use your legal skills in everything you do, but it almost seems to me like a law school investment might not even be worth it.
I use my legal skills a lot. I've used them a lot. Absolutely. I'm really glad I got out of legal practice because, and what's interesting is I'm at a phase in my life where I may be going back into a consultative practice because I've got a lot of opportunity to do that. And at this stage of my life, I might actually be okay with that because I've been involved in business. I've been on the inside. There's an aspect of it where, okay, it would just be a lot more stress-free if you didn't have to get involved in that. But I do use it, and anybody that's got the fortitude to go to law school, I think you learn a lot in an MBA program. I'm not saying you don't, and I would be I have much better technical business skills if I'd gone ahead and got an MBA as opposed to a law degree. I think doing something uniquely different, because they make you think in a different way. The big issue, when you hear that law school is hard, I don't know that it's really hard. It's that it really fundamentally changes the way you view the world. And so you got to be prepared for that. It's a bit cultish in a way. I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad thing, because I don't think it is. But they really do sort of retrain the way you issue process, if you will. And that is valuable. I don't think you need to go to Berkeley to get that. I had really great professors there, and mostly but as with most schools, I think, this is my view, it's your peers and the people that you surround yourself with that are, and so, look around the room, and these are the people who are really educating you, and a good chunk of what your 4-year education is going to be about is the people that you go to school with. And you are with a more highly selected achievement crowd at a place like Berkeley. than you are at Eastern Oregon. I mean, just, I'm gonna say it. And so, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't want to paint that way at all. You can learn, and so it's how you apply yourself to that. So again, back to this whole thing, I don't think you need to spend what you'd have to spend at a top 10 law school, and I don't know all college and all graduate programs are expensive these days, no question. Ridiculously so. That's a whole nother topic that you get me on that I don't know would be of any value to you other than me just up here, telling you what I know and what I want to get involved in, and how we relook at how all students sort of go through a system that may not always include college, by the way.
Well, what are your thoughts on how you would?
So are you interested in law school?
No. Well, I looked at it. Honestly, I was just curious. I looked at it I was considering it, but that's really the reason why I didn't. I just the investment that you have to make, and like looking at career path wise, like.
Well, okay. So here's my thoughts on it, because I think if I understand where you're going with it, one of the things that I am really interested in right now is the concept of when looking, because I got involved with 11 million kids, I got involved with urban kids, I got involved with poor, poor rural districts, and all the rest of it, and whether it makes sense as a society and for each individual kid that we direct every single child to college. Vocational schools got a really bad rep, and they probably should have for a period of time. Because what it was just simply, you can't make it in college, so go here and get this training, and then go get a job, working in a factory somewhere. The thing is that because we're becoming much more of an information technology society, those factory jobs require really smart and capable people. And so most of them require certifications. And I was at a fascinating lunch about 3 years ago. Got invited, banker was in town, president of our bank was in town, and they wanted to talk about recruiting and talent acquisition. So how are you doing with recruiting? And I thought it was going to be a pity party for me because I was going to do this major project. I needed about 100 job engineers, and Nike had just announced that they were going to do something. They were redoing. They had some big plan, some big design thing, and they were hiring every job engineer in the Portland area. And I couldn't compete with them on salary and benefits and the just do it sort of purpose. So I was like, I was having a really hard time getting engineers, and I was really worried about it. And so this was an opportunity. So yeah, I'll go to that lunch and I'll talk to the banker, just so I can vent. There's going to be no solutions for me. I go there, and there was a president of a sheet metal company, HVAC company, air conditioning and stuff like that. There was an electrician company, and there was one other industry type company there that I've never been able to remember what it was. And it was unbelievable. I mean, they're sitting there telling me they've got 1,500 open positions in their trade union or their trade organization in the Portland area, and they had, and I'm not kidding, 8 applicants. And I'm like, okay, that's not me. I mean, that's not as bad as what I'm dealing with. I'd at least have 16 applicants for my 100 position, kind of thing. And I was flabbergasted. So, I'm listening to them talk, and I wasn't quite getting all the information I wanted, but I'm sitting there going, in my own pride, arrogance, I'm going, it's got to be a supply demand issue. You guys just don't pay these guys enough. So, why would you not have more applicants? So I'm walking to the parking lot and talk to them, and I asked that question. I said, oh, no, our starting salary for an electrician is, out of high school is, they won't know much, but we'll start with 40 grand, and because we can make that's valuable to us. We can make a whole lot more off that person, and we'll start with 40 grand. And once they get a level of experience, they get journeyman experience. We're talking $85,000 to $120,000 a year, for a good electrician. Sheet metal guys are saying the same thing. I'm like, wait a minute, you're talking living wage jobs here. What's required of these guys? Oh, well, they have to know this level of computer science. They have to know this level of this. They have to know that level of this. It's not college. but it is certifications. And how do you get them into a program that gets them that level of certification? Not the high school student. That's part of why they only get paid 40. Only get paid 40, kind of thing. So it's like, so I'm hearing about this possibility of a pathway that makes more sense. And by the way, to your very point around law school, one of my daughter's a school teacher, and kind of proud of her to make her, she had an opportunity to go to several schools, several private schools, and she's an elementary school teacher. And there's a program in Northern Colorado that is a really good elementary school program. Public school, she's out of state, but they were willing to give her a scholarship, kind of like mine, waived her all of her out, and basically waived her out of state tuition. And we put away money. She had money. She could go to a private school if she wanted to, but if she didn't spend all the money in that account, she could buy a house when she got out, kind of thing. And the other schools that she was looking at would have cost her 3 or 4x what she was going to pay at University of Northern Colorado. So she says, I'm going to be a school teacher. Best scenario, I'm making $45,000 a year, $50,000 a year when I get out, and it won't go up much from there. And so why would I go to that other school? She had several friends who also wanted to be school teachers. We live in a fairly nice neighborhood in Portland, and kids get delusions of grandeur, I guess, and their parents don't dissuade them. They got into Dartmouth, and they got into Harvard, and they got into some other Ivy League schools, and they went and got an elementary education degree. I don't know what the ROI of that is, and I think it's ludicrous. I really do. Actually, it's like, what were you thinking, parents? And my child has a Harvard degree. I feel really good my child's at Harvard. I suppose I would have too, but I'm really proud that Michelle went to University of North Colorado. You can go. I mean, I was guilty of it because I wouldn't have gone to law school if I hadn't gotten into a top 10 law school. It's just because I was indecisive. I didn't know that I needed to go to law school. I did, so I went, and I'm glad I did. And it's kind of cool that I went to a top 10 law school, and it certainly allowed me to get into a really good law firm, and it went from there. So I'm a little off topic here, but there's the one pathway of getting kids into these trade, industry jobs that are truly living wage jobs. I mean, this isn't baristas at Starbucks. This is a real job. But we definitely.
See, she didn't mean
Wow.
that.
I'm going to need to apologize. Let me see if I can pull this out of my. Wow, that was bad. I'm just going to admit that was bad. I'm just going to have to beg forgiveness.
I like Starbucks. This
isn't being recorded, I hope. I see the next YouTube going.
Maybe we're something.
Yeah, there goes my relationship with Howard Schultz. Anyway, all right. Okay, let me get to the punchline of this. The thing is that there is an experience that you guys are going through that, and Wilson I should now have to kick Wilson out of the room, but because it goes, but I don't think he disagrees with me. It goes beyond the academics of what the actual classroom work, and again, it goes to that peer relationships, what you guys are learning from each other. Again, you hear my focus on social interactivity. That is a maturing thing that happens in college, and so I use my son as an example. He's 32. He's a bartender. He's a good bartender, and he loves it, and I think he likes this lifestyle. I don't know what he's going to do when he's 40. And I don't know what he's going to do when he finally decides to sort of like start having kids and stuff like that. But on the other hand, he can make it work. He makes good money. It's service industry, so he doesn't have insurance, other than what he pays for. And it wouldn't be what I would do because I'm too chicken to do that. Be on kind of on the edge like that. But he really enjoys it. He went to college. He was a music major. I told him when he decided he was going to be a music major, great, he'll be worth $1.75 when you get out. What are you going to do? Because he didn't want to teach. And but it was his passion, and he's good at it. And he still writes music, and he does videos and stuff like that. And he's having a good life. And so I'm proud of him. And he's on his own. I don't support him at all. And but here's an example of somebody who you might argue should not have gone to college. What did he get out of it? if I had to do it all over again, even knowing where he is and what his passions are and where he is and that he's doing okay, if he was 18, I would insist that he go to college. So here I am saying, I think we should set up these other pathways for kids, and I can't even do it. Because, and again, what I'm looking to do, and I'm trying to figure out, I'm working with some organizations where this is being dealt with, is how do we build this system of access to certifications, like that, so where you can get those kind of jobs, but that you're also providing the opportunity for, young adults, 18 to 24 years of age, to work together in a way that you're getting the experiences, getting away from mom and dad, going off and doing your thing, and having that period of that period for those kinds of experiences to occur. And I'm trying to, I really want to try to figure this out, because I think this is this notion that you, particularly, and it goes to the very cost of college. If there is a more effective, cost-effective way to grow really good, active citizens in this country that are intelligent, smart, living wage jobs, I don't think everybody has to have a college education. But I can't. But again, I come from a place where I could never recommend it differently for my kid.
So let me just share a story that's kind of just a little bit, not quite on that target, but it's related, I think. My friend Doug, his daughter, she was really bright. You might even know Doug. His wife's father owns the Oregonian.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
So Doug is,
I don't know him, but
yeah, he's I forgot the name of that family, but anyway, it's big in Portland. So his daughter, she went to USC. She got a degree in marine biology or something like that. Then she went and she got a job training dolphins at SeaWorld in Florida. Moved out there. As you can imagine, training dolphins doesn't pay a lot. She's actually sharing an apartment with somebody else who's working at SeaWorld. But you know what? She's doing what she loves.
Yeah.
And he's, I don't know what a USC degree costs these days, but it's probably $50,000 a year. So he's got
easy.
So he's got $200,000 into that education. But he said, to see his daughter do something she enjoys, pursuing something she enjoys, his life is worth it to him. But then there's the other piece of it, that there's all these foundational skills, the people you meet, being able to, make commitments,
Yep.
turn in assignments, you learn about marine biology and all this stuff. And so it's really difficult to look at just the near term, right? She's got her whole life ahead of her, and she might be a Pulitzer Prize winning author somewhere down the road, or
Yep.
she may be the next Jacques Cousteau or whatever. So it's hard to sum up the worth of an education in one point in time, you know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of an accumulation of your life experiences and what you've developed based on what you've learned here or
Couldn't agree
there.
more. That's and when I say I want to develop these alternate pathways, it's how do we replace that kind of learning and those sort of experiences, because there is a huge development thing. And again, everybody doesn't have to follow the same path in every school. You guys' experience here is different than experience at Oregon State, and different than experience at Whitman, and different places.
No, exactly, and some of it happens so gradually you don't even notice. I mean, you start here and you start taking classes. By the time you finish, I mean, you know how to do things that you didn't know when you started, but it may not even feel like you learned it along the way because it's so gradual,
Absolutely.
But when you compare your skills to people who didn't go, it's a difference. Is college the right move the right path for everybody? Certainly not. I mean, some people, and there's nothing wrong with, learning how to be a blacksmith or, building Harleys like Jesse James or, there's, being a rock star. I mean, there's all different kinds of paths people can pursue. But I do think, regardless of which direction you decide to go, the skills you learn in an environment like this are important. Just like this is my personal belief. I personally believe that the skills you learn in athletics are really important too. Even if you don't go pro in a sport. You know, the idea that you can set goals, you are willing to work hard, you work with teammates, you know, there's a discipline that goes with it. All of those things that athletes learn as backgrounds of sports are really important life skills.
Yep.
Even if you never set foot on an NFL field or on a, you know, Major League Soccer field. I mean, you're.
Yeah, well, and actually, I could not agree more. And so part of this at a more personal level for you guys is developing those skills and the experiential, you know, being able to prove the experiences that you've had and your knowledge around that kind of stuff. So again, where I sit these days, when I came out of school and in the legal profession at the time, it was really important that I had gone to Berkeley. I would not have gotten a job at Perkins Coie was the law firm, gigantic Northwest law firm. And I don't think I would have gotten a job at Perkins, or it would have been very difficult for me to get a job at Perkins if I had gone to University of Oregon. I view that as a failing of the law firm, not either University of Oregon or, you know, anybody else. It was the fact that they cared, but it was this lazy man's approach to, they were using Berkeley's screening procedures, and the fact that I was one of, you know, I was one of 500 or I think it was 300, class of 350 or something like that. But they'd had 15,000 applicants or whatever it was, you know, some stupid number of applicants, and so I was presumed cream of the crop, and they were using that as a lazy man's way to do recruiting. And maybe that's still the case. Maybe that's the way it still is. You know, when you guys are going to be looking for your first job, you know, with your degree in hand and stuff like that, that may still be an issue. So what you have on that, you know, again, sorry, I didn't say that right. Your grade point average might matter then, you know, kind of thing. But I would say whatever else you can put on it. I mentioned in passing, I was student body president at Oregon State. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, it really wasn't, but it looked like a big deal. And I think it carried the day. I have no idea how I did it. I'm not that smart, but I had a phenomenal LSAT, you know, which is what really got me into Berkeley. I mean, I was at the very, very top, and I almost didn't have. I mean, the funny story is I took that test, and I was so sure that I just absolutely tubed it. And back in those days, you could literally call them up within 48 hours and say, "Don't score it," and it would never count against you. If you took it again, if you let them score it, and then you want to take it again, they'd average your scores. You know, they were willing to do that. But I thought I tubed it, absolutely tubed it. And I came so close to calling them up and saying, "Don't score it." And I said, "No, I don't want to have to study for it again. And I don't really know that I really want to go to law school. So if it's a shitty score, I just won't go to law school. I'm only going to go to a top 10 school," you know, kind of thing, because I just was competitive that way. And then I just get this score that's like, oh, where the hell did that come from? Which only demonstrated to me that I'd really learned how to take selective choice tests, nothing more, because truly I wasn't that smart. Which was demonstrated to me once I got to Berkeley. Anyway, but it's, you know, so I'm a bit of tangents here, but think about how you're able to, even now, demonstrate the skills that you've learned. And I mentioned earlier empathy. So think about, in this case, your customer. Your customer is the person you're hiring, the person who's trying to hire you, because you're selling to that person. Think about what it is that they're looking for and how you, based on what you've done, can build a resume that demonstrates your skills and your experience, because I would say that those are still going to be the distinguishing factors. Everybody coming out of here is going to have a degree from EOU. Everybody coming out of here is going to have grades at a certain level. And again, I don't know how much, you know, it matters. It does. But where I was going to get to, you know, now I'm old. You know, that's been many years. But it has been many years. I've hired, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, directly, really hundreds and hundreds directly and indirectly. And when I say indirectly, I didn't make the decision, but I was involved in the hiring process. And I can honestly tell you, I have not looked at the education of a person for probably a good 15 years. Where they went to school, their grade point average, what I've been looking for and all the questions that I've talked about is, what have you done? What are the experiences? And of course, coming out of college, you don't have many. I mean, you've been focused on this and learning that you're getting your knowledge base, and you're not getting an opportunity to develop your skills and experiences because you've made that choice. But work on that and find ways to sort of do that, because that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, the other thing, to think about too is relationships.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh indeed.
You
And
know,
that's because that's the way you get jobs.
exactly. If you know people, or if you know people who know people, being able to develop that network and work with that network to find the right opportunity, find an opportunity where, where you fit.
And be proactive about that part, because I completely agree with Wilson. That's not one where maybe I'll find a relationship match somewhere where somebody knows somebody and I've got an opportunity. Go out and create those relationships. And again, it goes to the same thing I was talking about earlier: is when you find your first job. They may not have the same philosophy I have. I'm going to tell you, go out and find an opportunity to meet people in other departments in your organization, and you will become a very valuable employee very fast. Because when your boss finds out that you know that person in engineering on a personal level, and they can get that code draft written that much faster, you're superstar at that point. Because you're helping your boss get the work that he needs done, and that is not a common. That is something that I feel like I had. It wasn't inherent in almost any employee. A very small percentage of employees that I've worked with is that they move out. They come into the job. They want to impress their team and their boss, and they insulate themselves. They do their work, and you need to get your work done. But you have lunch hours. You have after work. Companies usually have social events. Find ways to meet people in other teams and be deliberate about it. Say, okay, I've met people on the customer service team and the engineering team, but I've never met anybody on the finance team. I'm going to go find that person.
Yeah, it's an important lesson too in terms of social interaction. And I know we're getting close to time, but I can share one story. I went to work with Cadre Technologies, Jeff talked about. I had a fresh MBA. I went in as a product manager. I really was wanted to go to Stanford, but they deferred me for a year. And I was in a position where Portland State said, well, if you come here, we'll just pay for it,
Mm-hmm.
So I got to do my MBA basically they paid me because I was a dean for the graduates, for the dean's office.
That's a better story than mine.
So I went to Portland State, felt bad about that because I really wanted to go to Stanford, but when I started Cadre, right across the hall from me was John Blattner, Stanford MBA. I had the same title, cube across from him. Probably cost him $200,000 to get his degree. So
No, that's exactly how I felt with Brent Bullock. Did you ever run into Brent? Yeah. Everybody knows Brent, right?
Yeah.
So Brent was my buddy out of Oregon State who went to Stanford. And it's like, okay, we both in the same damn law firm, and you're paying school debt, and I'm.
So I started Cadre, and I'm a finance major, computer science person. I'm really focused. I spend the first couple of months, I'm just focused on what I'm doing, and my boss comes up to me, Kane O'Brien, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing my job, man." He says, "No, you're doing great stuff, but everybody in the building is going to hate you, right? One, you're just cranking out all the stuff, and that may or may not be bad, good, making everybody look bad in that way."
In that company, I'm glad you were working hard because everybody needed to work a little harder.
And he said, "But it's because people don't know you. So what you need to do," he said, "what I want you to do is take half an hour or an hour every day and just get out of your cube and go meet people. Go over to engineering and sit down and talk to them. Find out what their story is, what they're doing, what makes them, and just get out and meet people." And I started doing that, and it was amazing how much easier it got to get things done in the organization too. Plus you develop friends, right? So it's more fun to come to work.
Yep.
But then, people develop a sense that they want to work together with you to accomplish something. And so it really the whole thing just gets a lot more effective.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
To your point. Well, you guys, I know that, usually we're at 50 minutes, so no break in the middle, so 20 till is probably about time. I don't want to cut anybody off though. Do you have one last question? Do you just want to wrap it? Get out of here?
Please, don't call me again.
What?
Are we doing our metrics today?
Yeah, it's Thursday, but I'm gonna have you guys have to send me your metrics because we didn't set aside time, and I wanted to take Jeff on a tour of the campus. So I apologize if so we
I have to
were,
go back and look at Ackerman.
so we were talking about ratios and metrics. So what we decided to do was we created a game that would allow, we created a game that divided the class into 3 teams, and each team picked a set of metrics that would be able to predict whether the team playing was going to win or lose. And I think the teams are focused on football and soccer, but they could have chosen any sport.
Yeah.
Austin, yeah?
Do you want us to just finish the second half of the chapter for the homework and stay this week then?
Why don't you, if we didn't get to talk about it, let me go ahead. I'll just bump the due date to next Friday.
All right, cool.
Yeah, and then, yeah. And then if you have any questions, you can bring them on Tuesday and we'll talk through them together, okay?
Thank you.
You guys, have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Could we thank Jeff for coming to talk with us?
My pleasure.
Oh, come on, guys, a little applause.